life is learning, and I've had a great opportunity personally to learn and grow and read and research. And I have also an opportunity to associate with Scott Bradley. Mr. Scott Bradley is from northern Utah. He is a constitutional scholar, and it's my honor to have him on as a guest on the air about once a week. We learn much. Mr. Scott Bradley, please come forward. And thank you so much for being here with flags and family and certainly an aspiration. So welcome and good afternoon, Scott.
When I was asked to speak, I felt a need perhaps to prepare a talk that might be a little more formal, and I'm inclined at this point to set aside that address that may have been prepared and speak a little more from the heart, but perhaps use some of the framework that I had in the original address, perhaps to supplement some of the things I might say. I'm so grateful that you're here today. It's a marvelous opportunity to be able to gather and commemorate the signing of the United States Constitution. 219 years ago, this coming week, that marvelous document was signed. You've heard some great addresses today. It's interesting to me that, and perhaps building on some of the things that George Washington said here moments ago, to kind of remind us about what was at stake and what is currently at stake today. He brought a young girl up and introduced her as perhaps the future of the nation. I spent the great bulk of my life studying the principles that this nation was founded upon. And the words of the founding fathers, the principles of proper government, the divine plan that was originally established, and it truly is a divine plan. God's inspiration was involved very much in the establishment of this nation. Perhaps we'll speak of that a little bit in a little while. But one of the things I've been impressed with as I studied the words of these founding fathers over the last many decades is that what they did largely for their posterity. When they said that they were seeking the blessings of liberty for themselves and their posterity, those were not idle words. Many of those men that stepped forth and signed the great documents or participated in the great conflicts or put at risk their lives because of their association with this cause of liberty knew that they would not live long enough to personally enjoy the great blessings of liberty that they sought for themselves and their posterity. But they were willing to perform the work that was necessary at the time in order that their posterity might have that great blessing. And in fact, they envisioned a land from sea to shining sea that would have a freedom that was unparalleled in the history of mankind. And they expected 300 or 400 million free men, as they called it, to live under those conditions. We are approaching 300 million inhabitants of this nation right now. They had hoped that that nation would endure 1,000 generations with the blessings of liberty that they had established. Unfortunately, we have strayed far from the principles that this nation was founded upon. And it is tragic, I believe, to see that we have let slip through our fingers the blessings of God that were bestowed upon this nation as it was originally founded. It's not too late, though. I believe this nation has a divine destiny. I believe that it has not yet been fulfilled. I believe that if we are to be able to fulfill our divine destiny, though, we must become awakened and aroused to a sense of our awful situation. We must become again arduous in our efforts to support this cause of liberty. We must again study, understand, and apply the words that were given to us as this nation was founded. As I said earlier, we have strayed far. What we do, we must do for our posterity also. Because our posterity at this moment, as we look at the little children that are around the park here, think of our grandchildren or our children at home, most of them do not know what truly is at stake. Perhaps some of the grayer heads here know. But their generation is aging also. And we need to instill in the hearts and minds of this younger generation that's coming up a love of liberty, a fire in their hearts. I believe that truly the cause of liberty burns in every American's heart, well, in every one of God's children. It's just that in this land we have been bequeathed the marvelous heritage of liberty, and we need to not let it die. Those embers that have burned so lowly in recent years must be rekindled. And I pray that through events like this, we might again be able to have that happen in America. For the past 15 years, we have been involved up in my community with an event that we established. We call it the Cache Valley Commemoration of the Signing of the United States Constitution. This year will be the 15th year that we put that commemoration on. Normally it's a week-long set of events. This year, because of the candidacy that I have assumed, we are having to narrow our focus a little bit. But on the 17th of September, the date this Constitution was signed in 1787, we will have another event in Cache Valley at the Tabernacle on Main Street. We would invite you to attend. We'll have a number of the Founding Fathers that will be there. We'll have a speaker that can give a constitutional talk. And we'll have some other inspirational words and music. So we would invite you to attend that. America truly is a choice land, and it is worth saving. Perhaps as I put my spectacles on to review some of the things that might be found in the Constitution, it reminds me of a story, particularly since George Washington was up here just a few moments ago, that I might review with you. Because the things that George Washington taught you can be found again in his writings. His farewell address, the works of Washington are volumes and volumes and volumes of writings about the most magnificent subjects you could possibly imagine. But at the close of the Revolutionary War, with all of the challenges that they had faced, and the men had not been paid, they had not been appreciated like they should have, George Washington became aware of an effort to have a coup that would have overthrown the nation and installed in place a military leadership. And this broke George Washington's heart. He met with the men that were planning to do this, the officers that had served underneath him. And they sat together with stony faces as he pled with them to try and help them understand that they had not fought for liberty, to turn it over to another type of tyranny, different perhaps than what they had suffered under, but yet a tyranny. And he, at one point, wanted to express to them that he had a letter from a congressman that expressed his concern and his desire to do what was right for the soldiers. And as George Washington took the letter out of his pocket, it was written in a small, cramped hand style, and George Washington was, at that point, a little younger than I am now even, but he had gotten to that age where reading spectacles were required. And in those days, it was kind of considered a bit of a weakness or maybe an offense to be able to put these on in public. But it was so important that George Washington pulled his spectacles out of his pocket and apologized to the men that were present. And they had been unmoved up to this point by his pleadings. And he said, "Gentlemen," as he put on his spectacles, "I have grown gray in your service, and I find myself growing blind." Well, it touched their hearts, because they knew that he had suffered with them through everything that they had suffered. He had been abused by the system as badly as they had been abused. And yet and still he loved it. He loved this country. And he could not stand to see that which they had fought and died for to be set aside so easily. Well, he read the letter. I doubt the men heard the letter. He took his spectacles off and walked out the door, and got on his horse and rode away. And the men stood at the windows and watched their great leader leave, and the coup dissolved. We need again, in this nation, leaders like that. We need leaders that can stand forth, that will not be tyrants under any circumstances, that will plead with the people to preserve the blessings of liberty, that will seek to provide the wisdom that we may find the path that will allow us to remain free. It's my contention that when this nation was founded, the words that were given by those that founded this nation were inspired words. And in fact, they testified to that effect themselves. They testified that they felt the hand of God upon them as they wrote the words of the United States Constitution. And I believe that those words need to be reinstilled in our hearts. We need to again embrace them fully, completely, and unequivocally. And we need to assure that those who lead this nation never stray from them. This is a grand and glorious nation. We excel in all goodness. But I do not believe that it is because the nation's natural resources are wonderful, or because we have an industrious people, or because we have a good climate. I believe that this nation, in large measure, has become what it is simply because of the principles the nation was founded upon. Almost without exception, those that founded this nation had a belief in God, and they sought to know His will and to do it. And with that faith-based foundation, they created a government that would preserve the God-given liberties that they spoke of in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And it is the purpose of government to preserve those rights. Governments do not grant rights. For a government that can grant rights can remove those rights. We got our rights from God. And that's the basis of this United States Constitution that we're commemorating the 219th birthday today. It was written that we might live in such a manner that our God-given rights might be protected. I hope that this little gathering becomes larger over the years. Our little gathering up in Cache Valley started with about 200 people in our little park that we had when we first threw the celebration, if you will. And we've had as many as 10 and 12,000 that have attended. Like I say, this year will be a much smaller attendance. Well, let's talk for a minute about this Constitution, if I haven't already used up my time. This Constitution is a written document. The words that are written in this document may be known and understood. One of the great lies that is found in the nation today is that it is a living document. It only lives in the hearts of the people, and I fear that in many instances it is dying. But it is not a document that may be arbitrarily and unilaterally interpreted to be whatever anybody wants it to be. The words that are written there had definitions. Those definitions may be known. They do not mean anything but what the plain English language says they mean. The Founding Fathers thought it was important enough that people remember that they required in two places. Article 2, the President is required to take an oath to sustain the Constitution. Article 6, all who hold office are required to take an oath to sustain the Constitution. Those that come to office in this nation must raise their arm to the square, and before God and the entire nation, they take an oath that they will sustain this document. It is a written, binding contract, and the Founding Fathers looked at it as such. It is not guidelines, to take a term from a recent popular movie. It is a written, binding contract. It is a job description of those that hold office. They may not stray from it without violating their oath of office. And when we have individuals that hold office and violate their oath of office, it's like someone working in a workaday job, and they have a job description, that they've exceeded the boundaries of that job description and perhaps violated their charge within that office. What happens when that occurs? People, what happens is that the management of the team helps them find a way to the door. We, the people, need to help those that have violated their oath of office, that are no longer willing to be bound by the written contract that they have raised their arm to the square to uphold. They need to be removed from office. Well, we're going to find Perhaps just as a comment here, I may say that the founding fathers talked about the original intent of the that they had in mind when they established this nation. And again, it's not open for arbitrary and unilateral interpretation. And just to give you 2 or 3 examples of what we might use as a basis, because they defined what it meant. James Wilson was a leading participant in the Constitution Convention of 1787, and he later became a United States Supreme Court Justice. He said, "The first and governing maxim in the interpretation of a statute is to discover the meaning of those who made it." Chief Justice John Marshall, who participated in the Virginia Ratification Convention, prior to becoming a Chief Justice also, by the way, he noted in speaking to the Virginia Ratification Convention that if a word was understood in a particular way when the Constitution was framed, the Constitutional Convention must have used it in that sense. And when he assumed the office of President, Thomas Jefferson confirmed the importance of keeping the Constitution within the bounds of original intent, and this is what he said as he took office. "The Constitution on which our Union rests shall be administered by me according to the safe and honest meaning contemplated by the plain understanding of the people of the United States at the time of its adoption, a meaning to be found in the explanations of those who advocated, not those who opposed it. These explanations are preserved in the publications of the time." It's plain and simple. We can know those meanings if we're willing to seek them out. Most in office today have long since left that perspective. Well, let's look for a minute or two about some of these things that were talked about in the Founding Fathers circles. First of all, perhaps as a framework to put this under, the Founding Fathers were so concerned about power and its abuse. They knew that it was the nature and disposition of almost all men to begin to use power incorrectly and to abuse it if they were given it. That was an aphorism that they were well immersed in and had seen it happen. And so, what they did was they divided and subdivided the power that was granted to the national government. They went so far as to divide and subdivide the sources of power. They did not want anyone to be able to have a bigger power base than should be had that they might begin to abuse. And then they granted specific powers to each branch of government. Each branch of government was expected to guard that source of power, or that power that they were granted, and prevent the abuse of that power or the encroachment upon that power by another branch of the government. They understood very clearly the constitutional protocol that you cannot redelegate a power that was delegated to you by the people. They had studied very carefully the works of John Locke, and John Locke in his constitutional treatise, second treatise on civil government, he spoke at length about the fact that if a people delegate to a legislative body a power to create law, that legislative body cannot redelegate the power that was delegated to them from the people, because the people were not involved in that decision. So the legislative body has power granted, and they cannot allow another part of the government to usurp that power without it violating the checks and balances that they so clearly established. So let's just spend a few minutes here, and we do only have a few more minutes. I wish there was more time to be able to explain these in detail. But let's look, for example, at Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution. It says that Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. In recent years, in fact the last decade plus, the United States Congress has delegated that authority to supranational organizations, NAFTA, GATT, World Trade Organization, CAFTA most recently. Right now on their plate is the FTAA, the Free Trade Agreement of Americas, which will expand that authority. What happens when we get these put into place is that Congress has given to supranational bodies, bodies that are not elected by the people, bodies that are simply bureaucrats that are put into place by other countries, in which the United States holds one seat. one vote, and by the way, covers most of the financial obligations, and allows that supranational body to establish the regulations that regulate commerce with foreign nations by the United States. Congress has unconstitutionally delegated that authority away from themselves. We should be angry about that. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 it says, Congress shall have power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. Congress must establish the rules of immigration and naturalization. They have that right, authority, and duty. They cannot allow it to go to some other organization or to ignore it. Article 4 also says that the United States government shall protect all the states from invasion. Right now, by the most conservative estimates, in military terms, approximately 4 divisions of foreigners are invading our southern border every week. 4 divisions. Now, some of you gentlemen here may have landed on D-Day on June 6th, 1944. That day, the Allies landed 10 divisions to take back Europe. So every 2.5 weeks, the United States is being invaded by a force similar in size to that which was placed upon the beaches of Normandy on that fateful day, June 6, 1944. That puts it in kind of a perspective. These people that come to our country are not planning on leaving. They are taking up permanent residence and expecting that someday they will have the vote. The founding fathers of this nation were very concerned with an immigration policy that would allow people that were not steeped in the tradition of liberty that Americans had come to embrace and cherish, that someday, by their vote, those that came into this nation, if they were not immersed in the proper role of government and the cause of liberty, would, through legislative processes, destroy the blessings of liberty that Americans had come to expect and appreciate. This is no light matter. Estimates now are that perhaps 12 million foreigners, illegal foreigners, I guess I should say, occupy the boundaries of the United States. More honest estimates put the amount between 20 and 30 million. 20 and 30 million voters that have not been steeped in the tradition of the founding fathers is of grave concern. I'm going to have to skip ahead really quick in some of these things because we can't go down the Constitution line by line, although we should. Go home and do it. Congress shall have power to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 9. It also speaks of this in Article 3 of the United States Constitution. Congress creates the inferior courts, not the President. The President of the United States has taken it upon himself to create courts in which he might try so-called enemy combatants. This is in blatant violation of the United States Constitution, and most Americans don't have a clue that the President has not been given that authority, and yet the President assumes that authority. Now, there are those in the President's administration that have said he has plenary powers. That means powers that are unlimited, that are all-inclusive. And tragically, most Americans don't even have a clue that the President's job description is Article 2 of the United States Constitution, and it does not include the power to create courts. Nonetheless, he has. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10. Congress has power to define and punish piracies, felonies committed on the high seas, and offenses against the laws of nations. Offenses against the laws of nations. Could that perhaps be terrorism? The President does not set the rules of engagement on these issues. Congress has that authority. It has been overstepped, and Congress has not been courageous enough to step forward and say, "That's our job, Mr. President. Please step out of the way." And perhaps be a little bit more forceful than that. Wish there was time to talk about that. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11. Congress shall have power to declare war. Let's stop about that for just a second and talk about that. Not since the beginning of World War II has Congress lived up to that responsibility. In every engagement the United States has been in since World War II, that war has been entered into unconstitutionally. Congress has a responsibility to step forward and say, this is our role. In October of 2002, Congress met together and put together a resolution on the Iraq War. That resolution delegated unconstitutionally, as we've explained, because Congress cannot redelegate an authority given to them in the Constitution. That Congress delegated to the United States President the authority to go to war if he so chose to do so. Congress did not do their diligent effort. The process of going to war is a very, very serious matter. The Founding Fathers had watched and observed what had happened in Europe during their lifetimes, and they'd been very diligent students of history. They had seen that normally a nation would be involved in war because of the decision of a single individual, normally a monarch. They had seen the tyranny that had come upon peoples because of that. They had seen the cost of that. The people's blood, their fortunes, and their sacred honor have been put on the altar. And they did not want that to happen in the United States. They debated long and hard. How do we take a nation to war if it becomes required to do so? They knew it would happen, but they did not want it to be entered into, but by a very deliberative process. They decided they would put it as close as possible to the people, because the people's blood, the people's fortunes, and the people's honor would be at stake. So they said that will be held by Congress. Congress has the responsibility to examine the issues and the facts. A marvelous example can be found in the Chesapeake affair, which we don't have time to discuss today, but it happened during the Jefferson administration. And the United States, the war drums were beaten by those that had been offended by an action that had been taken by British warships. And when Congress, by the way, was not in session, Jefferson did not respond by taking the nation to war. Jefferson did not even call Congress back into session. He gathered as many facts as he could. He set up a program that would prevent future offenses by England against the United States, at least similar to what the Chesapeake incident occurred. And he had the facts ready for Congress when they came back into session and presented to them what he knew. By then, cooler heads had prevailed, and the war did not occur. In this case, though, in the United States, we were taken into a war precipitously, without a firm understanding of what the cause and justice of that war was. The problem was that now that we know the facts, we know that we were misled. That's a euphemistic term for lied to. America needs to have an honest Congress that would have examined that circumstance. And if it was a just war, if the circumstances warranted it, they should have taken an up or down vote and stood willing to accept the consequences for their vote. Instead, they delegated to the United States President an authority they could not delegate, and they used as justification for that in the resolution over 36 resolutions and statements from the United Nations. They went to the United Nations as justification for taking this nation to war. Tragic. The United States is not subservient to the United Nations. And yet, that's what our Congress did. Well, I've got to keep moving here. We're going to run out of time, and we're very fast approaching that. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 goes on to say that Congress has the power to grant letters of marque and reprisal. By the way, that's how you can go to war without having to deploy your troops all around the world. You can subcontract the war. I wish there was time to talk about that. And make rules concerning captures on land and water. What does that mean? Can the President set the rules under which he handles captures? Prisoners of war, enemy combatants, whatever they want to call them? No. Congress has that authority. Congress has that responsibility. Congress has been remiss in this horribly. Well, then we talk about how Congress sets up money to set up our military, and and basically calling forth of the militia, oh, and here's one, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 14, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces. The Commander-in-Chief does not have the authority to make those rules. The Congress does. Well, I'm going to have to close here, it appears, based upon the time. But the fact of the matter is, my friends, that when we hire someone through our vote to go and serve at the national level of the national government, we must insist that they honor the oath of office that they have taken upon themselves as they entered that office, and insist that they again come to understand that this is a written, binding contract that may not be varied from. We in America have become very faulty in our willingness to do that. We continue to return incumbents time after time after time in spite of unremitting betrayals. Unremitting betrayals. And it's tragic because our liberties are slipping through our fingers. I wish we had time to talk about the Patriot Act and how it eviscerated the Fourth Amendment. And as we lose these liberties, our posterity will not have them. They will never be able to enjoy the blessings that we enjoy today. And the blessings we enjoy today are greatly constrained from the blessings when I was the age of those children. I think of my youngest grandson, and I probably ought to close here very quickly, but my youngest grandson was terribly burned here several months ago, and he lingered near death for a long period of time, and he's recovered to the point that they were able to bring him out here and meet Grandma and Grandpa. And when he and his mother, a young woman in her mid-20s, and this little baby boy that's in a little burn suit that covers him from basically his wrists to his toes and his neck, came through security at the Salt Lake International Airport. They had a burn ointment that they have to put on his little body every time that they change him, because it keeps his skin more pliable and helps fight some of the infections and some of the things that are involved with burns. When they went through the check-in line at the security, they confiscated the burn ointment for that little boy. Now, I think that that is completely absurd. You've got a little mother in her mid-20s carrying a little boy that you can obviously see is painfully burned. And you have ointment for the little boy that they take away from him. 200 years ago, Americans roared like lions for liberty, and now we bleat like sheep for security. Those who give up liberty on behalf of security deserve neither. How far we have fallen. We hear of people that are arrested for having bomb-making materials in their homes. I think, my goodness, if you can make bombs out of toothpaste and mouthwash and chapstick, maybe everybody has bomb-making materials in their home. I don't know. But that seems to be the position we're at right now. If you're tired of politics as usual, if you're tired of hearing the sweet talk that leads to victory in politics that are forgotten immediately upon election, go back to the foundation. Remember what this nation was built upon. Hear the words of the founders. Apply them. Live by them. And insist that those that hold office live by them too. I wish there was more time, but thank you for being here. I wish there was 100,000 more.
You know, there's scouts running for the Constitution Party, running against Orrin Hatch, or I should say, running for the Constitution. And his opponent is Orrin Hatch. Now, another thing I'd like to do is, I think everybody here feels that people who run for office deserve a lot of credit. There's people run for their own aggrandizement, but there's people that are running that love this country and love this nation, and I want to acknowledge some of those people. We invited Republican candidates, Democrat candidates, we invited Libertarians, Constitution Party, and so on. So all the candidates, will you come here real fast? Just come up here real quick. I want people to see you because these guys put it on the line right here. They're out there banging on doors and scraping up money to try to stand up for this country. So let's give them a hand and let's let them introduce themselves. First, Scott, can you?
I'll intervene here just a minute. I have a question to ask you, Scott. A group of about 30, 35 citizens went in June, July, and August to the offices of Senator Hatch and Senator Bennett. We had a couple of questions. We would say to them, we just want direct answers. Will you convey this to the senator? Oh yes, the first time we went, they didn't know what we were talking about. The second time, they knew the words, but then they still didn't have any information. We finally said, when we come again, will you put a staff member on this so we can talk intelligently about the topic? I'm going to ask you the questions. Okay, Scott, by what authority did the President of the United States initiate Security Prosperity Partnership?
Well, actually, the President often does interface with other foreign nations, but anything that is done must be brought back to the Senate for ratification. And this is probably a longer answer than you wanted, but the real bottom line is that the President has no authority to initiate the Security Prosperity Partnership, which basically would erase the borders between the United States and Mexico, the United States and Canada, creating a regional government, basically, that would completely undermine and subvert the United States Constitution. And that's a tragic situation. And quite frankly, if I were in office, I would make all the power of my office to try and prevent that from happening.
He answered the second question because, ladies and gentlemen, I wish all of Salt Lake County and maybe Logan and St. George were here to hear that Senator Hatch and Senator Bennett have both said it's good for you and they support that issue. Thank you and good luck, Scott.